Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'd like to open the Tuesday, November 13th, 2018 meeting of the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission. Welcome to slightly smoky Half Moon Bay. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Evans?
Here.
Commissioner DeGon?
Here.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Here.
And Chair Hernandez?
I am present.
Thank you.
Can we go through the approval of minutes, starting with the 9th of October?
I move that we approve the draft minutes, or the minutes dated 9th of October 2018.
I have a question about,
Please.
to the staff on page 3 of the minutes. Under the Planning Commission discussions, 3rd bullet point, 2nd paragraph down, general agreement that the project should have minimal impact. I'm wondering what our meaning is so the sentence says the general agreement that the project should have minimal and to no impact on views of the hills and ridgelines. Do you think we might want to, I'm not sure what you said we've said. Is that a goal for the project or a criticism of the project?
We thought it was a project goal, and we thought we heard several of you make references to it broadly. We were trying to paraphrase the various pieces of input we got on that. If we didn't get that right, we're happy to amend it.
Through the chair, I recall having that concern.
I recall having the same concern. I think there was a little context around it, which is, I think there's some discussion on that point.
I'm just wondering what the wording is probably, I'm not sure what it says.
I think minimize impact overall, but I mean, I don't think it's eliminate impact, but
Minor detail.
so noted.
And then on page 4, under Planning Commission discussion on bullet point 3, it talks about parking. This is for the project on Kelly Avenue. I think you mean to make 2 sentences out of that. We're not clear about whether the parking on the front of the building would work out, and then we also made some discussions about that there would need to be either a lot merger or some kind of common agreement between the other parcel, because the parking wouldn't really fit where the garages are shown there. The backup space from the garages was not great. So it's really just 2 different issues you combined into 1 sentence.
Understood. We were trying to be brief. We put a semicolon there. Okay.
Thank you.
So I will amend my motion to include the comments just made.
I accept that as a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have the meeting of October 23rd, 2018. Do we have any comments on the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes of October 23.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 I need to recuse myself. I was not at that meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 So we have the meeting on the 30th of October, which is our special session. Do we have, these are fairly brief minutes. Do we have any comments on them? Not hearing any, can I get a motion?
They look great to me. Move to approve.
All in,
Again,
unless you have to recuse yourself from this one as well? On the 30th? Oh, not 30th. Got it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving on to public comment. So this is the portion of our meeting where if you have an item that you wish to speak on that is not on the agenda. You can come up to the lectern. You can submit a green card if you haven't already done so. I have one comment for public forum from Dave Shore. Mr. Shore? Please make sure the green light's on.
Now. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. Dave Shore, 423 St. Joseph Avenue. Comments regarding the impact of the proposed Hyatt Hotel project on visual resources in the town of Half Moon Bay. First, there have been comments from the Planning Commission that
Dave, could you speak just a little closer to the microphone?
Okay. First, there were comments from Planning Commission at various points in time that the trees along existing Main Street already obscure the view of the coastal hills, and therefore imposition of a hotel between the highway and those trees wouldn't really change the visual impact. So for the record, October 12th, photos from the iPhone from Highway 1 showing that the current ridge line does indeed project well above the trees and buildings behind there, so there is potential impact. The next section that I'd like to cover quickly is the fact that the applicant several months ago presented elevations and drawings of the proposed project, which were frankly done in the attempt to influence the Planning Commission's impression of this, the fact that this very large hotel would blend seamlessly and innocuously into the existing view shed. The massing drawings that they presented appeared to be not quite what one would expect knowing that site. So I had a design professional using the existing data from their packet remask the buildings. And what we have here is looking north from Highway 1. We're going to be driving northwards, and that's what it looks like a couple 100 feet north, another 100 feet north, another 100 feet north, and then looking south from Highway 1 as well. And again, straight on, this is from the bike path across Highway 1, which is an existing public right-of-way, which is frequented by people who will be looking towards those hills. So that's very quickly a walkthrough. All this is going to be presented to staff for the record. Looking at the existing, it's interesting to compare the existing view shed as it is now with the massing models that were created. This is looking north, and then superimpose the buildings on it. North, add the buildings. This is from the much maligned sculpture, looking north. Looking north. Along Highway 1, looking towards the hills, and then you put in the buildings at scale and accurately massed. A little bit further north, again, the buildings imposed on the existing view shed, and gazing southward, that's about what you would see, and a slightly different southerly view. And this is from just beyond the trees from Main Street. This is what the residents of the housing complex there now see looking towards the ocean, and that's what they would see if the hotel was built as planned. And then we have the real comparison. Those are some fictitious hills back there. This is what it really looks like from that view. Those are some fictitious hills looking to the north. This is what it really looks like. This is a view from Highway 1, and this is what it would really look like. And that's the east elevation. Again, that's more like what it would look like from Highway 1 edge. And I seem to have run out of time, but all this is in record for Planning Commission and hard copy here.
Thank you for your diligence on this and sharing your comments. We appreciate the community's input on this project. I can't comment on your comments because it's not on the agenda, but thank you. I don't have any other green cards, and I don't see anybody rushing to the lectern, so I'm going to close public comment, and we are going to move. No, this is not. 149 is the next item on the agenda. So we're going to close public comment, and we are going to move to the first item on the agenda, which is the lot line adjustment for 149 Kelly Avenue. Doug or Jill, do you want to take it away? We do have many new faces here today, so while they sort through the AV, if you do have a comment you'd like to make, you can fill out a green card, and they're in the back there, and hand it to staff or one of us over here on the side, and we'll be happy to take your comments.
Well, good evening, Chairman Hernandez, members of the Planning Commission. I'm, for the record, Doug Garrison, Senior Planner. This project, very similar to an item that was here a couple of months ago in August. Same applicant, Post Peninsula Open Space Trust. It's on Kelly Avenue. It's just west of the item that was here a couple of months ago. And this is basically the Andreotti farming operation. And the area just to the east of here, the Planning Commission approved a lot merger and a lot line adjustment. Moving a little bit west, we have 3 more parcels that Post has purchased. The idea is that this larger parcel, after the lot line adjustment, they will put a conservation easement on it for farming, for agriculture, and then all the properties will be sold back to the Andreottis at that time. To kind of refresh your memory, it's an unusual area. About 150 feet fronting onto Kelly Avenue is zoned residential R1. Behind that, going north, it's urban reserve. So those long lots are actually split. They have 2 different zoning designations. And this is, I think, essentially a family estate planning issue that as a family farm's been in operation for a few generations, it gets more and more difficult to manage. And so Post stepped in and picked up properties when they were available on the open market, and then worked with the Andreottis to preserve them, to keep them in agricultural use for the most part. So for this lot line adjustment, it's pretty straightforward. There are 3 lots to begin with. There'll be 3 lots when they end. Typically, lot line adjustment is a ministerial permit. There's not a lot of discretion involved. Here in the coastal zone, it's a little bit different. Requires a coastal development permit, which is discretionary. In this case, this is what it would look like afterwards. Those 2 sort of rectangular parcels that were landlocked to the west become part of the big parcel. And that's all in the urban reserve zoning and land use plan designation. 2 of those lot lines sort of flop down towards Kelly Avenue, and that turns into 2 smaller lots there that are all within the residential zoning district. So there's no change in intensity of use or the proposed uses at this time. The new lots conform to the zoning, the LUP maps. Become slightly more conforming. There's a 50-acre minimum size for the urban reserve lots. This one's, I think, about 8 acres. When you add the other 2 lots to it, it gets up to 9.5 acres. So it's closer to conforming, and it's all part of one parcel, which is a good thing. The other 2 lots on Kelly, they match the zoning. At this point, there's no development proposed. That would be subject to a separate coastal development permit if in the future somebody wants to. So from a land use standpoint, doesn't affect coastal resources, doesn't affect circulation, traffic, beach access. So, in conclusion, it's in conformance with our land use plan, the general plan, the zoning ordinance, subdivision ordinance, and we're recommending approval of the lot line adjustment. That concludes my statement.
Are there any questions for staff?
Oh, Les wants to go first.
Just to help me out, you're saying that Post is the owner of the property, am I correct? Assuming we don't approve this, what's the change? I mean, since Post
Post would
owns
own
it,
the property.
right, so they can
They could do
do
what
whatever they
any-
want with it, whether the lot line is adjusted or not. So I'm just trying to figure out the kind of the rationale for doing this as opposed to not doing it. Can you help me out on that?
Well, the lot line adjustment makes these properties conform to the zoning and the land use map designations, which is one good reason to do it. As I said, some of this, I think, and I haven't been involved in it, kind of gets back to family estate planning, that by establishing two smaller lots on Kelly, those could be distributed to different family members. They could build a house, they could move on, but the bulk of the land stays in the farming operation, so that's the intent.
Thank you.
Yeah, so briefly, let's see, a minor lot line adjustment is exempt from CEQA, is that right?
Yes, this would be exempt from CEQA under
Okay,
categorical exemption.
and if a single-family residence were to be developed on the resulting lots that were within the R1 zoning, of course, single-family residences are also exempt.
Those are typically categorically exempt.
Right.
Unless
Okay.
there's unusual circumstances.
Right.
If there were wetlands on the property or something, then they
Sure,
might not be.
sure.
But
No,
they
I
would
understand.
probably be
Right,
exempt.
so there's no trade-off in terms of understanding environmental impacts as a result of the lot line adjustment itself.
No.
Okay, thanks. No other questions.
Looking forward to the lot adjustment, so if we look at the property that's going to stay in the urban reserve, is there any impact from a buffer zone perspective for neighboring properties? Is there any new impact that might be created for the neighbors on properties facing Kelly as a result of the buffer zone that we might apply for agricultural or any concerns like that?
Not at this time, but should you have an application in the future for a home abutting the property, similar to what you've done in other circumstances, you could apply a right to farm deed restriction on the parcel to ensure that the operations can continue. You could also require a deeper setback from the rear yard in this case, the way this is set up. So these are things you've done in the past.
Very good, thank you. I have no further questions. I do have 2 public comments, so I'm going to open it for public comment. And I have Ben Wright from Post.
Okay, is this thing on? Working? Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks for having me back. Ben Wright, Farmland Program Manager with Peninsula Open Space Trust. Just to quickly comment on some context and I wanted to stand up and thank Doug and Jill for putting this forward tonight, and thank all of you for hearing us. So this is related to the previous project, and that the goal here is to protect the Andreotti family farm that's been out there since the 1920s. And what this allows us to do is to separate off that farmland, add it to the rest of the contiguous farmland, protect all of that with an agricultural conservation easement that will keep it there in perpetuity. So that's the intent and the reason for the application. Again, this is part of our broader effort to secure a foundation for farming, across the peninsula, and especially in San Mateo Coast. And this, of course, obviously is one of the few remaining gems here locally of important farmland. So, thank you. And I can take questions if anybody has them.
Thank you for the context, and thank you for your work here. We really appreciate it as a community. Any questions? The applicant? Okay. The next public comment we have is from Julie McHenry.
I'm one of the neighbors, so I can speak to the impact on the neighbors. And first, I just want to thank Post for everything they are doing to work to, save the Andreotti farms, and you have, so that's great. But this lot line adjustment, just to be clear, what it means is that those two R1 zoned lots will have houses on them at some point. And I think it's very different to look at these parcels on Kelly than it is on the earlier lot line adjustments. They're two different situations. These create two new housing lots. And plus, these are much further down on Kelly. These lots are only 2 blocks from the beach. That area of Kelly is already where we have there's no parking because it's a major walkway, pedestrian and bikeway for those people trying to get to the beach every day, and particularly on weekends. It's very congested. And it's good, though. I mean, we need that. We need to have that access to the beach, and we need it to be safe for those people who want to go to the beach and enjoy it. And it's already really over congested. No sidewalks, nothing. And 2 new houses in that part of Kelly is just going to aggravate the issue. And I think I'm just surprised that you can say there's no impact on coastal land resources. With that land so close to the beach, the wildlife there, the raptors, those people who use those access ways, I just don't agree that there won't be impact by having new residential construction that close to our beaches. And I don't think we need it. So I'm totally for what Post is doing. Post is already doing what they're doing. I know what Post wants to do, and I understand it from a financial standpoint. You want to sell the lots so you to help pay for what you're doing, which is great. But it's a big sacrifice that the city should understand for those people trying to get to the beach and having just more and more congestions, driveways, people driving in and out of houses. It just keeps clogging up that end of Kelly. So the Planning Commission should realize that the dynamics of Kelly Avenue are much different down at that end of the street than they are in the decision you made earlier. I also don't understand why you're asking for a coastal development permit at the same time you're doing the lot line adjustment. What will the permit be used for? So anyway, just another question.
Thank you for your comments. As a point of order, or I'll ask our attorney to correct me, but the reason why we're asking for a coastal development permit is because it's required under the law, and technically a lot line adjustment is considered development. So, okay. Are there any other public comments on this item? Otherwise, I will close public comment. Not seeing any, I will, please. Please state your name for the record.
Carrie Burke on behalf of Post, and also a longtime friend of the Andreotti family. I just, in clarity on the speaker's concern, the purpose really is that the 2 existing legal lots on First Avenue, that is an accepted street, they could be developed independently, and they are closer to the beach and to coastal resources. And so this really is a consolidation of the urban reserve properties and an elimination of some severely substandard urban reserve parcels into the larger piece that can continue on farming. And it also solves the problem of having a parcel with split zoning And the R2, excuse me, the R1 lots, that's the zoning that's in place today. And this does realize that use on Kelly where there is infrastructure, and it would be really less amount of spread of the infrastructure. And so that's on balance. I believe that it is most consistent with the general plan, the design, and how this would be carried out and in conformance with the general plan that we have today, and also what I've seen to date in the future general plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other public comments on this item? You've already made your comment. Thank you. No other public comments. I will go ahead and close public comment. I move it back to the commission for discussion. Gentlemen, us?
There's a de minimis change in terms of what we're doing here. I think I agree with staff that the impact is insignificant, and therefore I would adopt the recommended resolution here. So I'm for the change.
John? Jimmy?
Yes. So first, I'd like to thank the speakers, all of the speakers, for your comments, because I thought they were all cogent, and it takes a little effort to speak at a planning commission meeting. So you're to be commended. The last speaker spoke like a true planner in her analysis of the issues, and I anticipated some of the concerns that one of the other speakers raised. That's why I asked about the difference between the standards of impact that would be considered if a single-family residence were to be sought for the existing lots, as opposed to the lots as they would be configured if the commission were to approve this lot line adjustment. It doesn't advantage or disadvantage the applicant for that lot line adjustment in any way that I can see. The speaker also, the last speaker, also pointed out that this action improves conformance with our existing plan, which brings us to the reality that our job is not to decide whether we like a project or not. Our job is to decide whether it's consistent with the local coastal program or not. Sometimes we have to support plans we might not like. Sometimes we have to reject things that we might like. But based on the evidence in the record, it looks to me like this is a project that is consistent with the local coastal program, and the owners of the property, the post in this case, have a right to this, in my opinion. I don't see any reason that we could base a rejection on. When they come back for, if they choose to develop homes on this parcel, they or some subsequent owner, they would be bringing their coastal development permit back to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission would need to review that for potential impacts. Maybe there are wetlands, maybe there are raptors that would be adversely affected, I don't know. I will just say in passing, I think as the chair pointed out, the staff report suggested that there's no new development, and I understand that there are no new structures, but in the coastal zone, the lot line adjustment is actually a form of development. So it's a nit without any real impact. So I appreciate the comments, but based on the evidence, I'll need to support this project.
As a fellow commissioner who attends many meetings, I can attest that it can be difficult to speak at these things. So thanks for pointing that out. I don't have any comments. I think we can get a motion.
Motion to approve the resolution next in order.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Evans,
Yes.
Commissioner DeBon,
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin,
Yes.
and Chair Hernandez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Item's closed. Next item. So the next item on the agenda is a coastal development permit for an environmental review for Mariners Church, 100 Stone Pine Road.
Again, for the record, I'm Doug Garrison, the project planner. A couple of items. We did receive some additional comment letters after the packet was sent out. Those were placed in front of you this evening. We do also have potentially some revised language for one of the conditions that concerns vegetation and erosion.
Doug, can you do me a favor and get closer to the microphone?
And so that draft language is also placed in front of you. We'll get to that later on, so we'll sort of get into the nuts and bolts of it. So this project, Mariners Church, they're in Stone Pine, 100 Stone Pine Road. You look on the map, this is the building right here. There's the post office, here's the retail center, and the other office buildings in Stone Pine. A little bit hard to read here, but this red outline, L-shaped, that's the proposed addition to the building. This orange line is the property boundary. And I would note this southerly boundary has an irregular shape, and we'll get into that in a moment here. So what the project entails is it's a coastal development permit, a use permit that will supersede an existing use permit approved in 2013, architectural review, and environmental review for this project. The primary part of the project is a 6,700 square foot, two-story addition to the building. Other key features, there's a new stormwater retention area on the front of the building on the western side, and that does also have a patio on top of it, sort of incorporated into the design. Other new items that weren't really addressed in the previous use permit. There's a special event parking permit that would deal with larger crowds of people that might come for weddings or funerals, that sort of thing. Landscape plan does involve removal of some landscape trees. They're all non-native. I think about 6 of them are classified as heritage, and they will be replaced. One of the interesting things about this project is a vegetation management plan, which we'll spend some time on. It deals with the vegetation to the rear of the building, fronting onto Pilocitos Creek. And then there's also an offer for a public trail easement and a fence in that area. So a little bit of history is useful in understanding this project. In 1986, the Coastal Commission approved a subdivision that created the post office parcel and then the Stone Pine area. Part of that subdivision condition of approval was that they dedicate a conservation easement along Pilocitos Creek, extending 50 feet to the north from the edge of riparian vegetation. That easement became the southern property boundary for this project, for the property. In 1989, the Coastal Commission approved the conceptual master site plan and a coastal development permit for the entire Stone Pine development. As part of that, there was environmental impact report prepared, a number of studies, geotechnical, hydrological, traffic, biological. A few key aspects there. The Mariners building was originally approved as a 22,000 square foot building. It was built as its current format about 14,500 square feet. And everything was entirely outside of this conservation easement. Another requirement was that they dedicate a 15-foot wide public trail easement inside the conservation easement. 2013, Mariners came in, applied for a use permit to convert that office building into a religious assembly building. That was approved by the city. Then in 2016, because it was originally an office building, it wasn't really laid out optimally for some of their programs, the kids programs and community groups, that sort of thing. And so they came in with a proposal to add some more area to the building, and I'll let their architect get into the thinking behind the floor plan and the layout. So as part of this, we hired MIG Consulting, their representatives here tonight if you have questions. They prepared a biological assessment. We circulated that for comments for 45 days to all the resource agencies and the Coastal Commission. And then they also prepared an initial study, mitigated negative declaration, that was also circulated for 30 days for comments. So as I mentioned, one of the key items that we'll get into here is this conservation easement that was required by the Coastal Commission on the original subdivision, public trail easement, and there was also kind of a standard condition of approval that said that the owner of that office building had to landscape their property and they had to maintain that property in good order, well-kept manner in perpetuity. This is aerial photo I found online from 1991, and you can see this is the building that's now Mariners. You can see this odd-shaped property line, and the key thing is here, there's no vegetation. The riparian area was only about 40 or 50 feet wide along Pilarcitos Creek, and this was an additional 50-foot buffer from the riparian to the property line, and then everything built had to be set back at least 5 feet or more from the property line. And you can see their parking lot is partially developed. Everything else is just open fields at this point. This was something that MIG, the environmental consultant, put together, and it's a little bit hard to read, but this area is the original riparian vegetation. There's an area, black striped, that's a little bit bigger, and that's from 2002. And then the green is where all the vegetation is today. And it's grown basically up to within a few feet of the building, right up to the edge of the parking lot. If you go along Carter Park, it's right up to the top of bank, to the fence there. This is an old landscaping plan. The Passport building is the Mariners building now. So this is what was on the ground when they were developing the retail area next door. And there's a solid hedgerow of Escallonia. That's a non-native shrub. And then there's 6 or 7 trees that are also non-native paper bark trees in here. This is kind of interesting. This I just got off of Google Maps, but if you look at the different color vegetation, you can almost see the property line. If you follow that, it's just really different looking. You know, you see more mature trees, more fully developed riparian vegetation down here. This area was landscaped, it was maintained for a number of years, and then in the early 2000s, they sort of let the maintenance of the landscaping go. So now, you have blackberries, Cape ivy. Somewhere underneath this is probably the remnants of the Escallonia. But you can see it's really encroaching on the building, and that's creating some issues from a safety standpoint. Fire code, minimum 30 feet of defensible cleared space. Also, they have emergency egress doors to the rear of the building here that obviously you wouldn't want to have to evacuate, you know, a disabled person into a blackberry bramble. So that's where, like I said, you can see these pretty aggressive. This is Himalayan blackberry. It's a non-native. Very high fire potential, as well as the Cape ivy vines that grow through here. So this is the vegetation management plan that Kikuchi Associates came up with. And essentially, we're not going to have 30 feet everywhere, because right here, the property line isn't 30 feet away from the building. I believe it's 17 feet. So it kind of comes at an angle, and then from here, it's 30 feet down to the corner of the building, and then it follows the property line along just outside the edge of the parking lot and has about 27 feet of clearance. There are some specific requirements. There's a mitigation measure that any vegetation that's removed from here has to be done on the level areas, not on the slope going down to the creek. Has to be done with hand tools. No herbicides can be used. If it's done essentially along with the preliminary phases of the construction, there's a requirement for a biologist to do a pre-construction survey to monitor the work. So there are quite a few safeguards built into that. So for the main points that we had to analyze were the environmentally sensitive habitat area. Is this vegetation that's overgrowing the landscaping, is that riparian? Is it important habitat? The question was, you know, why is this building so close to this riparian? Coming in as a new planner, I was like, it doesn't make sense, and we had to go back through history to find out the building was fine when it was built, but the vegetation thrived in that buffer area. So the how is sort of, well, how do we deal with that? And that's the vegetation management plan. Public trail would also go in that area. I'll go back one. It would be right along in here. It could connect to the trail that runs along Carter Park and into the business park. At this point, we don't have anything for it to connect to, so it would terminate here at the parking lot. But that would have potentially a fence, like a wood rail fence, like you'd see along Carter Park, consistent with that. And that would be sort of the demarcation line. Any vegetation on the other side of that, you had to leave alone, but you could trim the vegetation closer to the building. So there'd be no question in the future. And the trail, depending on the final alignment, could help to sort of create a fireproof buffer along there. We do have a planting palette of native plants that could be planted in this area until the trail's built, or to supplement the trail, that would control erosion, would they're fairly stout plants that can hopefully withstand some of the non-native invasives. They're low maintenance, don't require a lot of watering, that sort of thing. And so when we looked at the ESHA and protected species, under our land use plan and our zoning ordinance, we have a specific definition of riparian vegetation. And it gets a little confusing because some agencies have a different definition. And our definition is very specific that it has to be over 50% of the ground cover, has to be certain plant species, has to be above the top of, has to be below the top of bank from the creek coming up. In this case, it's above the top of bank. It's not, for the most part, 50% native riparian species that would qualify as riparian. The other issue is that there's potentially protected wildlife in this area. Palacios Creek has steelhead, trout. There could be California red-legged frogs, San Francisco garter snakes, bats, nesting birds, that sort of thing. So the biological report and the mitigated negative declaration include an analysis of those potential impacts, establish thresholds of significance, and then also mitigation measures that would protect those species and the habitat from adverse effects from the construction or operation. One of the sort of interesting questions here is when you get into our land use plan, it's pretty clear. Development adjacent to riparian is, you can't damage the riparian, there's environmentally sensitive habitat area. In this case, all the development is on areas that are already paved with concrete or asphalt or ornamental landscaping right along the perimeter of the building. So it's not likely to actually damage the ISHA because it's in a developed area. When you get to the zoning code, it's a little more specific. It establishes buffers. It says development, well, if you're within 100 feet of environmentally sensitive habitat area, you have to prepare the biological report. So we did that. If you're within 50 feet, there's a very limited number of things you can build there. Trails being one thing you can develop actually in the riparian area and in the buffer, the 50-foot buffer. And then there's another clause that says if it's a legal building site, you can build there if you don't cause any damage to the environmentally sensitive habitat, and there's no feasible alternative that would cause less damage. So we've gone through that analysis. We've looked at different layouts. We think this meets those requirements. So we think it's consistent with the land use plan and the zoning code and with CEQA that we have mitigated all of the potential impacts to a less than significant level. The next issue that came up was parking. Question is, if you add 6,000 square feet to this building, are there still enough parking spaces on their property? That's what we wanted to find out. And in 2013, when they approved the use permit, the standard they used from the zoning code was you need 1 parking space for every 4 seats for religious assembly use. And when we looked at this, the addition would take out 4 of the existing parking spaces, so they would then be down to 82 spaces. So we said, well, there are different ways to calculate the occupancy of this building. So let's just start with the parking. If you have 82 spaces and you divide that by, or multiply by 4, that means you're going to have 328 people in the building. And the use permit limits the use to 328 people based on parking. Now also, there are fire code, building code issues that may come up in the building permit, and those are health and safety. So if the fire code says it's less than 328, then that's the rule. If it's more than that, the use permit says 328 is what you can park here. And so we do have some data from the applicant. From the 2013 use permit, they were required after a year to submit a monitoring report of the parking usage. And then they've also, as part of this application, submitted some data. And what we're seeing is that on a pretty busy Sunday, when they have 2 church services and a couple other things going on, they can park everything in their 82 spaces with some room to spare. So we're fine with that. Where it gets a little more complicated is if you have weddings, funerals, or a really large service like Easter or Christmas. And that's where we asked them to develop a special event parking plan, and that's included as an appendix in the initial study and will also be enforced as a condition of approval in the use permit. And essentially what we said, it looks like one big parking lot, but it's not. Half of that parking lot is on a separate lot that belongs to the other 2 office buildings. There is no recorded shared parking easement there. And so the use permit essentially says you have to provide the city with written confirmation that the adjacent property owner will allow you to park there for a big Easter service before the service occurs. If you don't get permission, then you can't do that. And that would probably work pretty well for weekends when the offices are closed. They've done that informally in the past, and it mostly worked. When it didn't work was on weekdays. If they had a big funeral scheduled for a weekday and it conflicted with the business, that's created friction with the other property owners. And so we said, if it's during business hours or you don't get permission from those property owners, you're going to have to secure parking off-site at the high school or some other facility and provide a shuttle service to get your people to the church. And again, we need written confirmation before you schedule that event to show us how you're going to park it. So this use permit does have an enforceable mechanism that the previous and existing use permit does not have. So it does tighten that up. So we think that the parking works. If they don't secure the off-site parking or the neighbor's parking, the use permit says you just can't do it. So that's where we are on this. Next big area is architectural design. We start with the big picture. We look at the site plan. We get into the building design, the materials. They're also proposing some replacement signs. And then just neighborhood compatibility with the other buildings in the area. And so they did put up story poles last week. As you can see, the proposed addition's about 7 feet shorter than the existing building. If you look over at this end where the flagging comes down at about a 45-degree angle, that's because they couldn't extend it as far as they had to because of these trees that are in the way. This is another view from up by the street. You can see the parking lot slopes down, so the existing building is pretty well screened already, and then the addition would be not extending up above that. This is right in front of where the addition would go, looking at the building at 80 Stone Pine. So you can see where the 45-degree angle flagging comes down. That's fairly close to where the wall would be for that addition. It overlaps with the neighboring building by about 10 feet or so. It does also have eaves on the first and second story that would overhang out from there. This is looking, Mariners is right here. This is 80 Stone Pine. If you look at where these tables with the umbrellas are, that's pretty much in line with where the front wall would be. And then this other row of flagging, that's where there's a 5-foot roof overhang that extends out over the entranceway would come to. And beyond that, there's a new stormwater retention area. It's engineered to accommodate all the runoff from the addition. It's beneath a new patio area at the western end of the building beyond the addition. This is the currently open stairway on the west end. This would be enclosed. You can see from the story poles the size of that. Potentially, this is an emergency, egress from the second story. It's exposed to the elements. It's potentially a fire hazard. It would just be better if it was enclosed for a variety of reasons. A little bit difficult to read, but if you look at the site plan, building additions right here. Over here is this new patio area with the stormwater retention area underneath it. The front of the building here, that's an expanded entranceway. Currently, they sort of use this asphalt area as a gathering place for coffee. They have some tables and stuff. That'll be moved indoors, a little bit nicer for the church members. And they also have that patio, which is set back from the parking lot and be a nicer place to to gather. If you look at the building elevations, there are these two rows of eaves on the first story and the second story, and they do a nice job of breaking up the facade. It gives it this nice horizontal banding, so it's not so massive looking. This lower eave is functional. It provides shelter for people coming in the front entranceway. You may have sort of large groups of people all getting there around the same time for church services. The materials are consistent with the existing building. These new eaves are actually consistent with the 80 stone pine. Has similar 5 or 6 foot eave that comes out around the building. So it's very consistent with the neighboring buildings. As we've noted before, it's shorter than the existing building from a visual viewpoint. It's really not going to change the appearance of the site substantially because the existing building's already behind it. If you look at the rear elevation, not a lot of change. Side elevations, not a dramatic difference. The new signage replaces existing signs. So this would be the wall sign, and then this would be a monument sign out by the street, and then a directional sign inside the parking lot. The wall sign is backlit halo effect lighting, which means that the front of the sign is not translucent. Light doesn't come through it. There are light bulbs behind it that shine on the wall, and so they create more of a halo effect around the sign. On the monument sign, the only lighting is in this tall column, and it's only the letters, which don't stand out very well here, but the letters are raised, I think, an inch or two from the face of the aluminum box. So the only area where light comes out is from the sides of the letters. It doesn't shine through the column or the front faces of the letters. So it's again a similar visual effect. It's more of a halo effect on the column as opposed to a bright, cabinet sign. Meets all the zoning code requirements for square footage. It's replacing existing signs. We did receive comments. There were several comments in support of the project. Those were primarily from community groups that use these facilities for their meetings. Those were provided to you. There was one comment from the the management company that manages 60 and 80 Stone Pine, the other two office buildings. And they had raised some concerns about parking, stormwater runoff, traffic, geological stability, and they did ask for a 30-day extension of time to review that. Our written response to them was that we sent the notice of intent to adopt the initial study mitigated negative declaration, the notice of that along with the notice for this hearing at the same time. So everybody received approximately 48 days to review the project, which typically we send out a 10-day notice for a hearing. They did not raise new issues that had not been addressed in the initial study mitigated negative declaration, and so our conclusion was it made sense to hold the hearing. We did encourage Mariners to continue talking with them and to see if they could sort out the concerns. At this point, staff has not heard back from the other parties. So in conclusion, project conforms to the local coastal plan, the general plan, applicable zoning regulations. Design is compatible with the neighborhood and the site. We don't think there will be any significant environmental impacts that we have not analyzed and that we haven't mitigated to a less than significant level. So we're recommending that the Planning Commission adopt the initial study mitigated negative declaration along with the mitigation monitoring reporting program and approve the coastal development permit, use permit, and architectural review. And that concludes my presentation. The applicant is here, and I believe the architect wanted to speak for a few minutes, if that's okay.
Thank you, Doug, for the thoughtful analysis and the work here. Would the applicant like to speak?
Good evening. I'm Don Baker, and I want to thank the Planning Commission for the opportunity to visit with you tonight. We look forward to addressing any questions that you might have. Before I introduce our pastor, I want to share some of the background we went through in securing this building and the expansion we want to have. We've been on the coast for over 30 years. We've had our services in the Ted Adcock Center here next door. And for many years, we leased space in 2 buildings in Shoreline Station. So in 2013, we were able to secure the Odwalla building. We remodeled it. It was an office building, and it had some limitations for what we needed. There was no elevator. There was not enough space for our kids downstairs, and it had a very small lobby. So we filed a request for a permit to expand in 2013. And we worked extensively with Carol Hamilton at that time. She took us through all of the permitting areas and the people to review it, and the CAL FIRE, the building department here. And she basically helped us lay the foundation. We went through several designs, and we laid the foundation with her. And then we were fortunate enough to be assigned to Doug Garrison in the beginning of this year. And Doug has been very thorough and helped us find some potential pitfalls that, with his help, we've been able to resolve and respond to. So that brings us here today. In September, we had the public notice. It went out and brings us here with you today. We have a couple of people, well, have a lot of people here from the church, and part of the committee to expand. But I do want to point out that we have our in-house architect here, Doug Gardner. We have people from our construction team, Ray Heckert, Scott Holmes, and from our landscape design, we have Tom Conroy. He's from Kikuchi and Kankel Design Group. So I want to introduce you now to our pastor, Paul Richardson.
Thank you all very much for taking the time to hear us. I want to share just a little bit about who we are and what we would love to see happen with this. I have been here for 30 years, and Mariners Church is made up of people on the coast side. And many of us have grown up here. I raised my family here on the coast side, and we love the community. We love the people that are in it. I tell people at Mariners, at our church family, that the church is not a building. It never has been. The church is made up of people. A building is nothing more than a tool to do the best we can for what God wants us to do. And I also believe, though, the better the tool, the more effective you're going to be. And right now, the tool is being used in a great way. I really want our building to be worn out with more and more people using it. And what this project really is all about is we just simply want to make the tool better for the people here and the community that we serve. Some of the people we serve, I love those that are in the recovery community. They work hard on their life. And we have said to them, use our place as much as you possibly can. And I want as many groups as possible to use our buildings and our facilities, and each week hundreds of those with addictions come and support each other. If you were to come tomorrow, right after lunch, you would hear the voices, the singing voices of the special needs community and Hope Services doing their music workshop. We have day camps and we have children's programming, and that happens more and more and more. We just like to keep doing what we're doing, just be able to do it more effectively. I was talking to a woman today who told me that she was not able to come to AA meetings because we don't have an elevator. And that's an important part of what we would want to see happen in this project. We want to make it possible for children to have adequate and optimal learning environments, and we would like adequate space for that. We dream of a more effective space for our programming, and I really love the people that have worked within the church community and even beyond to help us pull this together in design. We've thought very carefully how to be good neighbors. We want to enhance the business park that God placed us in, and so we made adjustments to what we originally planned and reduced our square footage in order to have a roof line that matches the other buildings within the office park. When people drive in, we want them to look at the whole complex and say, this looks really good. Our drainage and infiltration system is a tremendous improvement for both our property and our neighbors. It collects roof drainage from our building and our neighbor's building as well, and it infiltrates it and diverts the runoff away from both. Our parking plan alleviates concerns about midweek congestion, and we continue to want to work with our neighbors to make sure that parking is adequate for all. And we're working with really, really good people to help with vegetation management. We want to replace non-native vegetation with native, which will protect the erosion and also improve fire safety, which is now a concern for absolutely everybody. We're sensitive to the creek behind us. It's an important part of our coastside environment. And we really want this to be an improvement for the people in our church family, the neighbors, the tenants around us, and really for our coastside as a whole. We want to just be able to keep on doing what we're doing, just do it a little bit better. And we do look forward to your thoughts and your comments on how we can make this project even better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a few other public comments. I'd like to start with Peter Clark.
Good evening. I'm Peter Clark. I'm president of Corporate Realty Management, which manages 60 and 80 Stone Pine. We greatly admire the church. We recognize the church as a very important part of this community. They do good things for youth, for adults, and for those with issues. Many of the members of the church are friends of ours. We're also an important part of the community. We've been here since the early 90s when we managed and then bought the Odwalla building. We moved Odwalla into that building. And then we built 60 and 80 Stone Pine, and we built the Coldwell Banker building on Main Street. For 2 decades, all the tenants in this park got along. We didn't object to Mariners Church coming into the park. We didn't object, but we should have. The use is incompatible. It's an office park. They bring 300 people to a building designed for 60. Time limitations won't allow me to go through the 12 reasons why you should say no to this. But I want to get on the record 4 things. Number 1, the IS and the staff findings are inadequate and inaccurate. We call for the rejection of the expansion, or at the very least, a full EIR. The proposal should be referred to the Coastal Commission, since this would be a variance of a plan approved by them. This would be development in excess of what was approved by the Coastal Commission. Staff report says church will be required as a condition of approval to secure parking from us. We've worked with the church before to provide parking, and they've abused the privilege. We've been required to hire security guards to protect the rights of our tenants to park. We were told as a condition of their approval that they were required to file annual reports on their parking. We've asked for copies of those reports, and they haven't been forthcoming. Should we assume the church didn't comply? We're going to hold the town and the church liable for damage to our property caused by additional hardscape and soil drainage. The church has admitted to us they haven't done soil tests. We've done a lot of soil tests when we built 16 and 8. These are very unstable soils. Adding more drainage, improperly installed, will exacerbate a very difficult problem. They're violating their own commitment they made when they came here in 2013 when they said they would limit their assembly to 300 people. Now they're asking for approval to almost 350 people.
4 years ago, they told us they would work with us to do a plan that would be mutually acceptable to all the parties in the park before going public. That's another promise they broke. The first we knew of this is when we were informed by the town that there was this proposal. Did they think they would sneak it by us? This is an intrusion on our light and air. Significant storm damage, significant drainage problems. The outside patio will be intrusive on our tenants. We'd ask you to require them to not use that during business hours, but their word hasn't been good. We asked the church how it is they plan to pour concrete within 5 feet of our property. They're building in less than 5 feet from our property. How is it they're going to build that without entering our property? That permission will not be granted. We urge you to say no to this risky proposal. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yvette Moctezuma. Followed by Marcus Max Gunkel.
Muy buenas noches a todos. Good evening to all. My name is Yvette Carrasco Moctezuma. I grew up on the coast side. I am been in Half Moon Bay all my life. I went through the whole school system here. And I actually had a lot to say, and all of a sudden I was caught by the symbolism or the emblem. Vivir, trabajar y jugar. To live, to work, and to play. You know, I think Mariners encompasses that in the spirit of that. And that's been the vision, it has been community. It is the vision and the hope to bring community to the church. Trabajar, jugar y vivir. In that vision, being a member of Mariners, a few years ago, or a couple years ago, Pastor Paul had a vision to bring more of the second, third generation of Latino Hispanics that were not being represented in Half Moon Bay, 30% of them, because Mariners Church is predominantly a Caucasian white church. And we began this vision, and he hired me. And that is a vision that I've had dear to my heart, to bring more of this demographic and bring down those barriers that we see everywhere, in our schools, in our community, and now in our churches. And it's that vision that I really want the Planning Commission to really see, to open the eyes to see, your ears to really hear, and the heart to really discern what we're trying to do. We want to bring community. We want to bring outreach. We want to bring more families. Unfortunately, our building does not have the capacity for that anymore. We want to reflect what Half Moon Bay is. Queremos vivir, trabajar y jugar. And we want the community to be able to see that. That when they enter the doors of that church, that they see a sense of community. And we really want to represent that at Mariners Church. So I just hope, again, that just really discern what we're trying to do. Really open the eyes of what we're trying to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Marcus Max Gunkel, followed by Marilyn Weens.
Members of the commission, my name's Marcus Max Gunkel, about a 30-year resident here of Half Moon Bay. And the thing that I wanted to bring forward is not only the religious but also the secular nature of the activities that the church does. They have good 20 to 25 groups that they help out. You know, Coastside Hope has actually been mentioned. It's interesting on Wednesday when you have a lot of people that have a few difficulties sometimes, they kind of bring their own joyous noise when they get a hold of those instruments. But it's fun to listen to. One of the other impacts you may want to think about is groups that I've been involved with there end up providing benefit to the adjoining tenants. Meeting at a place like Half Moon Bay Coffee Company or Jersey Joe's, either before or after, there's a significant financial impact that people going to Mariners Church has in those entities. even Pizzeria West, assuming they have enough dough. The other thing that I find fascinating is, in a previous life, I represented the Catholic Church, the Jewish Federation, several temples, and the Presbytery. And a lot of these issues, it's always interesting when public municipalities get involved in trying to regulate what religious organizations can or cannot do, be it use permits or whatever. And there's very limited things that in reality can be done without violating that separation of church and state, which is a fundamental tenet of our Constitution. It really is. And I thought it was interesting to comment about making restrictions on parking on a religious holiday. Easter and Christmas, they're going to tell the church they can't park. That can be difficult. And the other thing is, I know that tenants in their other buildings in 1680 have actually made their space available to those other groups when there's church camp and things like that going on. And there's been a sense of cooperation. There's been a few problems that I'm personally aware of during weekdays when there were funerals for civic leaders, which draw quite a few people. But they do wonderful work. It's ostensibly not much of an expansion, if anything at all. And to raise issues like drainage or whatever when you're actually putting in more draining and there's gutters and all that versus the stuff going on the ground now, it's a red herring in reality. But I hope you approve it. And I hope Mariners works with their neighbors, because we're all friends and neighbors, and we're here to support one another. Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn Weens, followed by Caitlin Garrett.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Weens, 22 Bay Hill Place, here in Half Moon Bay. I'm fairly new to Half Moon Bay. I've been here about going on my 5th year. And I do attend Mariners Church, and in addition to that, I attend one of the recovery programs at the church also. Just last week, I invited a new person who's been really struggling and invited her to come with me. When we got to the church, she looked at the stairs and she couldn't do them. It was very disheartening. She really needed the support and the help, but because of that barrier, she was unable to get to that meeting. And so I would I highly support this. And I also see the impact it has on the youth in the area. I work with our youth, and I also work out in the community with our youth, and the programming that we have for the youth, not only on Sundays, but on Wednesdays and other activities that are fun for kids, that are safe, that we utilize our facilities the best we can. And as far as the parking, there has never been a Sunday that I have heard of whenever we have new groups or anybody meets, the first thing we always say to each other is, you know which area we're supposed to park in. And we honor that, and we do our best to honor that. So we do make a choice each Sunday to make sure my husband and I drive through that lot and we go and park on our side, because we know that's where we're supposed to park. And I know everybody else does that too. And occasionally we might have new people who don't know the rule, but we make sure that they know by the time that they leave. So, thank you.
Thank you. Caitlin Garrett, followed by, I think this is Gerald Buck.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Caitlin Garrett. I'm the Children's Director at Mariners Church. I support this expansion in regards to the children. I grew up here as a child. I went through the school systems, and it's a small town, and it's full of so much support, and I am so blessed to be able to give back to the community and raise up those children spiritually and mentally. And I can tell you right now, as our church is growing, we are running out of room. Right now we have combined classes, which are not best utilized to be age appropriate, and this expansion would help combine or separate those classes so they can be more age appropriate. We're also We're also adding different rooms. It adds that more development and also more directed learning. We could lower the teacher to child ratios, which allows teachers to give more attention to the kids in our community. It also allows us to have a larger impact on our community during the summers with our summer camps. It allows us to run a safe space for our families to send their kids to over the summer. It also gives us greater opportunity to add safe family-oriented events and activities, as well as support groups, and greater parent resources on the coast-side for childcare in a safe environment for our children. With the addition of the elevator, it also makes us, allows for those children who want to attend youth group who can't because they can't come up the stairs. It also allows our children to be able to come upstairs. It creates a better safe space for them. This expansion project started when we realized that we have a heart, well, we've always had a heart for kids, but we want to see that grow, and we want to see more children. And as the coast-side is growing each and every year, with more and more young families working in Silicon Valley, these families desire a place for their children to grow spiritually. And Mariners, I believe, provides that on the coast-side. That's it. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you for your comments. Gerald Buck, followed by Stan Pastorino.
Gerald Buck, 1110 Lauren Lane, Half Moon Bay, California. I will preface this by saying I am not a member of the church, but I know many members of the church. And I'm here to support their application for the church growth. I was asked to review the proposal by several interested parties, and they approached me because I sat on the Planning Commission for 8 years here in Half Moon Bay. A lot of what's here now, like it or not, is in many cases part of my doing. So what I did when I was approached with this is I sat down and I pulled up the staff report, I pulled up the entire package, and I went through starting with the proposal itself. And then I went to the staff report, which ties back to the proposal, and then I read all the additions, all of them, and I went through with the thought in mind, as I used to do it, what is the impact on the area? What is the environmental impacts? And when I say impacts on the area, I'm talking about traffic, additional people, that sort of thing. So I went through, I looked at the whole thing, and I approached it based on my experience over the 8 years on the Planning Commission. I came to my own conclusions about the project. The only thing I did not read was the resolution that you're being presented with tonight. That was the last thing I read. Resolution and I are in agreement. So I feel pretty good that I haven't forgotten a lot of my Planning Commission training. The project does meet CEQA requirements. There are certain items that needed to be mitigated, and I feel they're properly addressed in there, such things as the parking, the ingress and egress, the fire access, the drainage, the vegetation, because one thing I learned when I was on the Planning Commission is a riparian corridor. That's sacrosanct, and this project addresses that and takes care of it very well. So the only other thing I'm going to say, excellent report, very well done. I wouldn't mind being a commissioner and reading the reports. It was very well done. I'm very pleased with the whole project. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, and if we can see further than others from where we are, it's because we're standing on the shoulders of giants.
Bear with me while I get my stuff together up here. this lectern wasn't built with tall people in mind. Good evening. My name's Stan Pastorino. I reside at 12491 San Mateo Road, Half Moon Bay. I've chosen to speak tonight as a member of the community and a member of the Mariners Church family. I'm third generation Coastside. I'm born and raised here. My children are fourth generation, and my grandson is fifth generation. I know a lot of you are what's going through your head right now. He can't be old enough to have a grandson, but I do. Ryan is just the apple of our eye. And again, you know, it's not the years, it's the mileage. Some of you know I suffered a setback 5.5 years ago. And when the doctors tell you that the stroke you had should have killed you, you kind of puts things in perspective. And when you realize you got another chance, and you also come to realize there are things out there that are bigger than you and more important. In spite of the fact that I attended Catholic high school and I sent my kids through Catholic schools, I was never a big church goer. And although I knew about Mariners for years, I didn't start attending until my wife Patty asked me. What I found was a group of people who only wanted to learn more about and practice their faith, and a very inclusive group of people who welcomed everybody with open arms. Many of them I know. Some of them were longtime friends. And those I didn't know were warm and welcoming. I soon realized that the building wasn't the church, it was the people in it. And that there are no strangers, only friends that you haven't met yet. I'm proud to say I'm no longer a newcomer to Mariners Church. I'm part of what really is a family of faith. Life-changing events can open your eyes and make you question a lot of the things you yourself, pardon me, I didn't used to need these either. Question a lot of things about yourself, one of them being your faith in something larger than yourself. At Mariners, I can ask the hard questions and get honest answers, all in a friendly, supportive place with coffee and donut holes and music. I'm part of what really is a family of faith. Mariners started in 2000 with about 40 members. I'll be done in a second, I promise. And now we're asking for this expansion because the family has grown. And like any healthy family that's outgrown its house, it's time to expand the house. Please afford us the opportunity to accommodate more like myself and to continue our good works. This is the kind of growth that a healthy community needs. Thank you for your consideration. Your approval tonight would be a great service to the Coastside. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We have one last comment card from Aisha Barrow.
Hi, everybody. My name is Aisha Barrow, and I've been in Half Moon Bay for about 10 years. I've been a member of Mariners for about 5 of those 10 years. And as my family has expanded, I have a 2-year-old daughter now. I have found it very difficult to balance coming to church and also finding childcare. Faith is a really important part of my life. As a busy woman, I think it helps center me, especially at times of challenges, and I've found that Mariners has been a place for me to do that. So the perspective that I want to bring is that not only of a mother who has a child that attends the nursery, but also of a nursery volunteer, because I volunteer there once a month. And Caitlin is the children's director, and she's already mentioned the small space that children have to work in. I was volunteering this past weekend, and I could attest to that. It's a space that is for children from 0 to 3. So you often have like a newborn, like 2 months old, children as young as 2 months old, alongside with 3-year-old toddlers. So this is not optimal for learning. It's not optimal in terms of having crawlers and also walkers. So I think having a separate space for those babies and those toddlers would be ideal, and help really young families that are really trying to nurture their faith, find a safe space, and at the same time find childcare. So the other thing that I find the expansion would serve is having a bigger lobby. I know that the services are really an important part of the Mariners worship, but in addition to that, there is everything that happens after the service. There is the meeting other folks in the community, the talking to folks in the lobby, and a lot of time we don't have the space to do that because the worship is just right there. We don't want to interrupt it. So that bigger space would serve that purpose as well. And the third point that I want to make is that I have found that Mariners and the folks there are very open-minded. I also come from a non-traditional background in my faith. I grew up in a household where my mother was Christian and my father was Muslim. And I think despite that, I have felt very welcome into Mariners. I have views that sometimes have conflicted with the vision of Mariners, but they have been very open to listening to me. And the reason why I bring that up is that that openness to me is a testament that I feel like if they could be open to that and to my background, they could also be very open to working with Peter, whom I've met in the parking lot. He's a fine gentleman, I'm sure, but I just want to add that color as a testament of the openness that I've seen in Mariners that I think will serve them well as you guys are trying to determine whether they will be open-minded to working with their neighbors. So that is kind of the perspective I want to add. I'm out of time, and I am hoping that this commission will see the passion that has come through from every member here and be in support of this project.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or people who would like to come up? If so, you can go to the podium, please. And we ask that you submit a comment card at the end.
Hi, my name's Colton Walter. I'm 485 Miramar Drive. I've been here for about 6 years. I'll make my comments very brief. I just want to express from the construction team the execution strategy and philosophy. I come from 10 years of construction project management. The last 3 years I've been working for a large biotech company over the hill, managing construction in very tight corridors, minimizing interruptions or any kind of impacts to neighbors, lab facilities, you name it, within the business model there. So I just want to just reach out that whenever we get into the design phase and the construction phase, I'd absolutely want to coordinate with our neighbors in 60 and 80 Stone Pine to make sure that we are mitigating any kind of risk or any kind of measures that you feel are risky in the construction phase. And so I open all of our team's efforts to partnering with you guys and making sure that we have a safe and effective construction program or plan and execution phase that makes sense for both of us.
Yep. Please, if you have any other comments.
No.
Okay. We just have a protocol of directing your comments to us, not to members of the audience. Thank you. Are there any other comments? Okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and close public comment, and what I'd like to do is take a 5-minute recess and give us a chance to regroup here, and we'll come back. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to call us back to our meeting. Okay, so thank you all for the short break. I want to thank all the speakers and city staff for the presentation, the speakers for their comments. As somebody with children and family members in recovery, I appreciate the work the church does and the many activities you have to help our community be stronger. This is a civil matter around the property and what's allowed within the city, and we're not here to pass judgment on anything or do anything with respect to establishing religion or establish what we do or don't like, but it's more about what's permissible in the city. So I just want to make sure that that's clear here. I'm going to, there are a number of issues that were raised in the course of the public comments, and we have an opportunity to obviously speak here as a commission, but what I'd like to do is I have a few things that came up. I'd like to open by asking questions of city staff so we can make sure we get some of the comments addressed. One of the issues that was raised was with respect to the drainage plan and to the existing soils and the potential for damage under this new development. I wonder if staff could respond to that concern.
Yes. Well, I would point out that for the drainage plan, the original plans that were submitted in 2016 were reviewed by city staff, including engineering and fire. Engineering required them to revise the drainage plan to bring it up to current standards. And so that's what's in the plans today. So those plans were submitted, and then those were reviewed by the city engineer. They've determined that they meet all the current standards for stormwater runoff, and it will be an improvement over the existing conditions where a lot of the drainage basically just goes into the storm drains in the parking lot and then down into the creek. This is an environmentally more sound approach. As far as the soils go, we didn't require a specific geotechnical report for this addition, based in part because when this entire area was approved, there was an EIR prepared. There were supporting documents for that, which included geotechnical study, traffic studies. The building's been standing there since 1990. The foundation isn't cracking, the door's open. We do always have the ability, when they submit for a building permit application, to require geotechnical investigation. That's something we could consider. Does that address your concerns?
I think so. There will be some geo-analysis done as part of, like, there's a normal process. So.
Yeah, a lot of projects we do typically require the geotechnical analysis when they get to the building permit stage. In this case, we address that to a certain extent in the initial study, in the mitigated negative declaration. There's a section on geologic hazards, and based on the size of the addition, the existing conditions, the previous work that was done, we decided it wasn't necessary to get one during the CEQA review process.
And has the city engineer reviewed these plans?
Yes.
Okay. There were questions raised about the parking use plan, and that was originally part of the original CDP. Can you comment on that?
In the 2013 use permit, there was a condition of approval that required that after 1 year, Mariners had to submit a parking monitoring report to show that the parking was working. They did comply with that. I have not personally been able to find that report in the files, but I did speak to the previous planner, Carol Hamilton, and she recalls receiving it. Mariners has forwarded me their copies of it. And based on that data, they, for the most part, on the regular Sunday services, were well within their capacity.
Was there an obligation to do that after the first year?
The way the condition was written, it was up to the discretion of the planning director, that after reviewing that first report, they could require additional ones based on the first report and no reported problems from the neighbors at that time. The planning director at that time decided that no additional reports were required.
I don't have any other questions. Jimmy?
Yeah, thank you, and again, thank you to all the speakers tonight, and writers. I appreciate the time that it takes to write as well. So I want to start in where the drainage question ended, and see that there is a nexus between the drainage plan and the vegetation clearing plan. This proposal, as you pointed out in your very first slides, deals with vegetation that has moved up bank from where it was when the project was, the existing project was built. And there's a variety of plant life that has come quite close to the building. As I understand it, your assessment is that, so there's no question that Pilarcitos Creek is a riparian corridor. That's specified in our LCP, and that is not whether there's a arroyo willow or not, we know that that's a riparian corridor.
Correct.
Because it's named explicitly. So then there's a separate question, which is how far from the existing building is the upper limit of riparian vegetation? And if I understand it, the riparian vegetation in our existing LCP is it's a little bit tortured. It doesn't, Himalayan blackberry and some other plants that thrive in a riparian corridor aren't listed in our definition. So what you see when you look at the vegetation on the ground isn't the legalistic interpretation of riparian vegetation, although to anyone who looks at a riparian corridor, they would say, duh, that is riparian vegetation. Can you tell me how far back from the building as it stands now the riparian vegetation in the LCP sense of the word begins?
I don't know that we have a very specific answer. The LCP definition links it to two factors. One is, it says typically on the slopes leading up from the creek. And the other factor is that it has to be, the ground cover has to be a minimum of 50% of about 6 or 7 different plants. Recently, nobody has braved crawling through the Himalayan blackberries and poison oak to count the plants to get a precise.
Okay, so we don't really know.
But I think we can safely say that that area that's just overgrown with the non-native Cape ivy, Himalayan blackberry, does not meet our LCP and zoning code definition. As you move further back, there is a transition. If we go to that photograph, the aerial I showed earlier, from the Google, where you see the change in this one, where you see that change in color, I think that's kind of a good starting point.
Mm-hmm.
That you can see the more mature riparian vegetation down here, the darker gray colors. And
The one
this
that looks
area,
like broccoli.
yeah, and then, the area above there, this is, like I said, more or less follows the property line. So this was landscaped and it was maintained as landscaping for a number of years. And then at some point in the early 2000s, before Mariners was there, somebody dropped the ball on maintaining it. So I think you could almost use that as a starting point and say that where that vegetation color changes, there's something distinctly different about it.
Okay.
That's where I would.
Thank you. I appreciate that you're making the best use of the information that you have. Then one of the things that we haven't talked about explicitly, but is relevant to the drainage question, is the matter of fire clearances. The fire department is going to ask for a certain amount of room. I think they like 100 feet, and they'll settle for 30 feet. And am I capturing that right?
The state, under state law, the minimum is 30 feet between sort of wildland areas and structures. The local fire district can require up to 100 feet based on the conditions.
And they've studied this project, and what do they require?
The condition, the recommended condition we got from the fire district was to basically to establish 30 feet.
30 feet, okay. And in this area, that means that a 30-foot swath of vegetation around the exterior of the building, let's see, I'm trying to remember where I'm looking for the staircase now. Oh, it's,
okay. Yeah, it's underneath the roof eave, but.
Anyway, so I guess my question is, do you think that clearing 30 feet from that area is going to get us above the top of bank?
Well, in some areas it's not going to be 30 feet, it'll be less. On the northwest corner, the property line is only 17 feet away from the corner of the building. So that's this area in here. And so we can't require the applicant to cut down vegetation on somebody else's property, which in this case is the city. But that's also where the bank starts to drop off. And so there are some environmental reasons why we don't really want to encourage vegetation clearing as you start dropping down that bank into Pilarcitos Creek, that you could create some erosion issues, you get into a little bit better quality riparian habitat. So the sort of the solution we came was 30 feet wherever we could do it. And so that's what this line is here. And the property line goes down to here. So there's a large area that's not going to have any vegetation removed in. And so what the basic ground rules were that it had to be on level ground. You couldn't do it going past the top of bank where you would be potentially causing environmental problems. They had to use hand tools. They couldn't use any herbicides or anything like that. And because this initial clearing would probably be done in concert with the construction if approved, there are mitigation measures that require pre-construction survey by a biologist, monitoring by a biologist. There are a number of protections to protect Pilarcitos Creek and the higher quality habitat around it. So those same conditions that apply to construction would apply to this initial vegetation removal also.
So the area that would be cleared to achieve the fire goals would be limited to level surfaces. It wouldn't be sloped surfaces.
Yes, that's specifically written into one of the mitigation measures.
All right, and if the additional drainage that's coming into this area were to create some kind of, if there were an erosion issue, do we have conditions to monitor and correct that? That was a concern I heard expressed by the public.
Well, most of the additional drainage is going to go on the other side of the building into that retention area. So we really shouldn't see an increase in runoff on this side of the building. I believe the applicant's representative can give you a little more professional take on that if you'd like.
Okay, another question thank you for all of those answers. I appreciate it. I was trying to prime that conversation with these questions, so I appreciate your forbearance. I look forward to additional clarifications. Another issue that came up in the public testimony was that the original project here was approved by the Coastal Commission prior to the certification of our LCP. And it is true today that if someone had an existing project that was approved by the Coastal Commission and they wanted to amend that, that approval, they would be going back to the body that approved it, I believe, the Coastal Commission.
Not necessarily. Jill's a little more up to date on this than I am, but there have been some projects where there's been some disagreement between the Coastal Commission and city staff. So we did consult with the Coastal Commission on this project, and we said, what's your take on this? Their take was that this seemed like it would be the city's jurisdiction. One, I think, contributing factor here is that when this original project was approved in 1989, this building that was approved was 22,000 square feet.
Yes.
What they built was more like 14,000 square feet. So with the addition, it's actually consistent with what the Coastal Commission approved. It's not a substantial increase. It's what they approved originally. So it doesn't seem like it would go back to them.
Given that you've spoken to the Coastal Commission staff, the city's understanding is that this is new development under a CDP. This falls under our LCP, so this is all under this would all be governed by the new coastal development permit, not the old one.
Yes. There are, remembering the original coastal development permit included this entire subdivision, so it doesn't go away. There are conditions that were approved with that apply to the residential, to the restaurants, so it doesn't go away. This just affects this one part of this one building.
Is there a landscaping plan with the original CDP that needs to be conformed to?
There was a landscaping plan. I did show a slide showing that area behind the building. And what was planted there was approved and supposedly was required to be maintained forever. But
Yeah, there was, and I appreciate your forbearance. So the last item was that this item is, well, there were other questions, but for staff, this is it's adjacent to a stream. I believe that it is appealable to the Coastal Commission. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I'll hold my other questions. Thank you.
In the event that the applicant cannot coordinate parking use plan with the neighbor, they have other means to address parking, but they're going to need to address parking as part of the use permit, correct?
yes, and that's actually one of the loose ends from the existing use permit that applies today, so that if this proposed use permit in addition was denied, the existing use permit stays in place. And it did not have a really enforceable mechanism to control the parking. We saw that as an oversight, and so that is addressed in this use permit. It gives better protection to the neighbors, and it also establishes clear rules for mariners. And so our position is, based on the zoning code, you could have up to 328 people there. Now, it's a church, so you have families, you have kids, that sort of thing. The monitoring data we've seen shows that on a pretty busy Sunday, they're fine as far as parking goes. Where we've structured this requirement in the use permit is that unless you can show that you can handle the parking somewhere, you can't do it. You have to submit to the city written confirmation before you schedule an event that you found somewhere to park the cars, or I suppose if you had an alternative arrangement with a van going around and picking up people at their homes, even that would suffice. But the point is, it is enforceable. It's part of the use permit, and they have to submit it in writing to us before they send out the invitations.
Great, thank you. John, do you have any other questions for city staff?
So in 2016, you said there were several proposals of the design. My limited brain capacity, I never remember seeing that at the Planning
I'm
Commission.
talking about what happened between 1989 and, say, the early 2000s.
Well, you were referencing Carol Hamilton, and she was reviewing designs, and but what I'm asking is that that's something that never came to the Planning Commission yet. Other design
The
concepts.
2006 use permit I'm not very familiar with, but they didn't change the building. It was just a use permit to change the use from office to...
I'm just trying to be clear with the question. You talked about they were studying expanding the building, did some design studies,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
that never came to the Planning Commission.
The applicant's architect can address that for you, kind of the thought process they went through to get to this design. It did happen before I was here when Carol was working with them.
So the answer is, we haven't seen that yet.
No.
Okay.
The
So,
thought
but my
process
second question is, if the architect or designer is here, I would really appreciate, we've done a lot of talking about the creek and environmental impacts and parking, and we haven't talked about the building at all, and that's what we end up looking at. And so if it's possible, I don't know if it's possible, I would really appreciate if the designer could kind of walk us through just how the decisions were
yeah,
made
he's
and why
here.
it's laid out, yeah.
We're going to open it up for public comment, and the architect, please.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Douglas Gardner, and yeah, I'm a member of the church, and also helped with the design of the church. And so I guess what I wanted to do was to show you the ground floor plan. Doug, do you have a pointer that I could use?
I do, but it seems to go on and
So right here is our entry. This is the existing entry right there, and we first and foremost wanted to put an elevator in, and so where I'm what I'm trying to spot on is an elevator for the building. That was first and foremost. Next was increased children's space, and so that area is down here. And third, we wanted to have a larger assembly area for the lobby. Our overflow during our church just overflows this existing space, and so we've increased it to that size, and also have additional assembly space for a coffee area. I think what we really like about this is this new flow through the building, and part of that is from this angled entry, which directs you right into the sanctuary, but also gets you into the lobby and gathering area of the church. The other thing that we really liked, and I think now, Doug, I'd like to go to the perspective drawing. What we have really been concerned about is our neighbors, and so the roof lines that we've designed really match both the scale and the material that our neighbors' roofs have. And so the overhangs that we have on the ground floor serve as canopies, but they also break up the scale of a two-story building. The overhang also wraps completely around this area, which is our closest point to our neighbors. It was important to us to pull this wall back an additional 5 feet from where we could have built, so that we could have a roof line that matched our neighbors, very close to them, and that actually wrapped around the building. So those are some of the considerations we had in designing the building. Any questions?
Is it okay to ask?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so then upstairs, you were just adding, so programmatically, so so the assembly space is not actually larger. It's where you have the services.
Where we have the services is still 300 occupants as we.
Same space that you have
same
now.
And the same
And then upstairs, you also have these sort of little offices added up.
Yes, we have
The reason
larger,
for all of that
we have
is-
more offices, and we also have more community meeting spaces up there. Our
As long as
staff.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. I just at least wanted to get the rationale of.
As long as the architects are asking, let me ask an architectural-related question that reflects my ignorance about architecture. So we heard testimony tonight that the elevator was going to be really valuable because there are people who would be unable to utilize the resources without being able to use the elevator. I think of an elevator as something that you probably can't depend on in an emergency, that if it loses power, it's not available. And so my only question is, if it becomes an essential tool for people to access, is it an essential tool for people to egress? And maybe the answer is no, but I want to get clarity of that.
Well, we do provide emergency exiting that meets the fire code. Whether there is a disabled person on the second floor and during an emergency and the elevator fails and the power fails, that person would have to be carried down.
Yeah, I'm not trying to hurt the project. I'm trying to make it better. These are not intended to be gotcha questions.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, it is, but it's one of the key factors to why we wanted to expand the building, was to be able to provide access to the second floor. From an emergency standpoint, we have the exits that the fire department requires. We also do, Don is reminding me that we do have backup power.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for the architect? Okay, I'm going to close public comment.
No, thank you.
I'll bring it back to the commission. Les, do you have any questions?
This is a question of staff. Obviously, when this was built in '93, it met whatever the city standards were in '93. Now we're adding square feet. So does the whole building have to meet current standards as far as fire codes, whatever is required, or just the part that we're adding?
I'm not a
Sprinkler systems, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I'm referring to.
I'm not a building code expert. The architect can probably address some of that, but this was reviewed by the fire district, also the building official. They've required everything that's required.
Okay.
I heard in the background from city staff that it does have to conform to the current standards. So.
If I could speak to that, that is what our objective is, to bring the whole building up to fire code. And also,
If you're going to add comments, please go to the lectern. Sorry. I'm going to open it up.
Go ahead.
well, the answer is yes. The whole building is brought up to the current code. And so the fire sprinklering would be up to code throughout the whole building.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second question, I just want to clarify with staff over here. When we approved the first use permit to make this a church, was there a number of people specified in that use permit? Maximum occupancy?
Yes and no.
Okay.
The
Good question.
applicant,
Answer?
as I understand, the applicant said 300 people.
Okay.
They said on a big service, we have a couple hundred people. We think 300 people's fine. So based on that, the planning staff at that time did the analysis of parking and said that works. They had more spaces than were required for 300 occupancy. As you get into the use permit as to how tightly it limits that occupancy, that was a little bit not as well defined as it could be. Like I said, that's one of the loose ends we're trying to tie up in this use permit.
So does this in any way change the occupancy that
Whether,
approved back in 2015?
well, first of all, if this use permit's approved, there's a condition of approval that said this supersedes the previous use permit. It goes away. Because we don't want to be looking at 2 or 3 different permits and trying to figure out what applies. This time, they said, well, we'd like 329. And the basis for that really was if they lost 4 parking spaces, which they would with this addition, they'd have 82 spaces, and if you multiply that by 4, that's 328. I don't think there was any deeper thought involved in it.
Thank you.
Let me double click on that for a moment. What's the current capacity?
Under building and
use
fire
permit?
code or under
The
use permit?
Is it
Under the-
unclear, or is it at least 300, maybe
It's at
328?
least 300 and maybe more. It's not as tightly written as it could have been.
So we have an ambiguous situation here. It could be interpreted as 300 or 4 times the number of parking spots that are available on the current use plan. And both of those are below the threshold for the fire department?
Yes. What we've said in this initial study is there are 2 factors here. With this addition, fire marshal's going to have to determine what the maximum occupancy of the building is when he gets the building permit. The second factor is parking. The fire marshal is health and safety, so that's, if it's less than 328, that's the rule. If he came back and said it was 500, 328's the rule because parking controls it. So it's a 2-pronged approach.
So the change in when it changed from the Adwala office building and the use permit associated with that to the church, that's when we had this change in scale, this material change in scale in terms of the usage from a couple hundred to 300 something.
Well, the issue is, if you look at our zoning code, the standard for an office building is, I believe, 1 space per 250 square feet. The standard for religious assembly is not based on square footage, it's based on the number of seats. So it's apples and oranges.
Point is that ship's already sailed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for city staff?
So, back to the veg removal. If there is any vegetation removed beneath the top of bank, we're in something that the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife would consider the stream, because that's where the bed and bank are. And since Pilositos Creek is waters of the United States, the U.S. Army Corps could potentially require, exercise jurisdiction over the removal or fill, in this case removal, of vegetation. And if we were to plant anything where the vegetation was removed, also fill. And so is there consideration in the project for requiring a streambed alteration agreement in the case of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and a 404 and a 401 permit in the case of the Army Corps?
That is addressed in one of the mitigation measures. Specifically requires mariners to consult with California Department of Fish and Wildlife to see if they feel that a streambed alteration agreement is required. This gets into what I spoke a little bit about earlier, that different agencies define riparian differently. Our zoning code has, as you've mentioned, kind of a tortured approach. Fish and Wildlife takes a little bit broader approach. They often say that if it's vegetation associated with a creek, no matter how far away it is from the bank, it's subject to this stream bed alteration agreement, even if you're not doing any work in or near the stream. And so we have required through mitigation measure and condition of approval that they go through Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife now and confirm whether that's required, and if so, to get the agreement.
To get it prior to construction?
Yes.
And what about the 401 and 404?
Barbara Beard from MIG may be able to fill us in, but she was the environmental consultant on this. My take is that I don't think it would trigger a 404 permit because where it's located up on the level area, set back that far from the creek, I don't think it would constitute incidental fill into waters of the U.S. If it was bordering on the top of bank, it could require a 401 certification through the Water Quality Board. But our concern was really more about the way Fish and Wildlife defines riparian, that could trigger an additional level of permitting. And I would point out that they would, as a state agency, they would use our CEQA document, the initial study, mitigated negative declaration, the mitigation measures as the basis for what they would require. So the analysis has been done. We're not deferring any of that.
Okay, and I noticed that when I visited this site earlier today, there was both on the site but also on the city land on the other side of the property boundary, a great deal of Cape ivy, which is A, an invasive exotic that harms habitat, B, is extraordinarily flammable and burns hot. And I wonder if, as an effort to manage fire hazard, the city has considered requiring the removal of the Cape ivy in this area.
We could require it on their property.
Would the city object to having it removed on in its property?
I can't speak for the city on that. I'm below that pay grade, but.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Judgment is the better part of valor. All right, let's move it to discussion here. Why don't we start with architectural review, and we'll get to the other issues. John, our architect.
Darn. Okay. So I'm really, I would prefer to do this after I hear from you folks, but I'm really conflicted because there's no question in my mind that this is a wonderful organization. I'm the last one that would ever critique anything that children are doing or special interest groups. And they started with a particular building that was already there and was kind of a poor job of a kind of a Palo Alto Sand Hill Road box that was even done more poorly. You know, and that's what was inherited in the project. I admire anybody that agrees to take that on. But where I'm conflicted is that it's kind of in a bigger picture that we have a vibrant, growing organization, which is just great. I mean, it's wonderful. And it reminds me of the Methodist Church maybe 15, 20 years ago. It started to go from just a fledgling organization to a much more vibrant organization. And they had an old building on the site that was not big enough for their needs. And they struggled with, what do you do with this building that we had on the National Register, which has some limitations. This is not nearly that kind of argument. And they had expanding programming, they had more children's programs, they had adult programs, they had a wonderful music program happening. Those of you that have lived here a long time know what I'm talking about. Stanley reminded me that I'm a grandfather and my grandchildren are fifth generation here. Never thought of it that way. It's remarkable. And there's a lot of that energy in this community. So I had an organization that's growing like yours, and they just didn't have enough space to do what they needed to do on the property. And ultimately what they ended up doing is, so the capacity of the site just wouldn't help them. And with parking, like most of the other churches on the coast side, there's a place for overflow that people kind of don't complain. It just kind of metastasizes out into the city streets. Or with the Lutheran church, there's kind of the Highway 1, you kind of ramble along. So this particular site is kind of landlocked in that sense for the parking. And there's sort of neighborly issues that go on as they continue to expand and are being forced into either these sort of awkward situations or buying or, taking over additional, with Methodist Church, they ended up buying the 2 parcels to the north of that property to accommodate what their needs were. And there was no other way for them to do that. So I'm really conflicted that this is a relatively minor addition in terms of the overall size of the building. And we don't have real facts of how it really impacts things with parking. The building code describes the need for parking in a different way than we're describing it here from a planning point of view. It's based on square footage and the amount of seating. And that's an internal use, and it's just, again, a circumstance of a healthy, growing organization. So in terms of architectural review, I'm just going to go neutral. There's plenty of opportunity to enhance and make much more elegant a kind of poorly decorated box that's already there. And I don't think it's our job to set us, it's the organization's job and challenge to decide what quality and what level they want to do with this particular building. So I'm going to stay neutral on making any suggestions or comments about how it looks. And I think we're conflicted with saying it's a great group. They've been here a long time. They're getting bigger and bigger, and that's causing problems with cars and neighbors and what's new with the coast side. Yeah.
Les?
My take is, as I think you indicated, the fact that we approved the building, Adwala building as a church, that ship had sailed. So the question is, we're adding to that building, and to me, looking at the story poles today, looking at the pictures, really not much has changed. I mean, it's still a box, just moved out a few feet in either direction. So, I mean, I guess I'm neutral there too. I mean, it's not changing very much in terms of view. So I can't say anything either pro or con. It is what it is. So it's my view.
They didn't mean it like that. As you pointed out, the church is the people, not the building, but they also weren't being critical of the building. These are highly refined sense of taste that are way over my pay grade in so many respects. And as you can see from the kinds of questions that I'm asking, though, I respect your concerns and appreciate your insight into that approach. Those aren't the things that concern me about this project. The things that concern me about this project are, I think, can be remedied, but I feel like there may require some additional conditions to do that. The first one is that I think it's a bit presumptuous of us to conclude that they won't be asked to clear vegetation downslope, and that if so, that wouldn't necessitate a permit from the U.S. Army Corps. I also think that with the clearance, right now, the vegetation and the pattern of weather that we have has achieved a certain equilibrium. And for those of us who study dynamics, I'm an engineer, not an architect, we are heading for a disturbance of that equilibrium. And what we need to know is that we are not creating a dynamic that's going to damage your property and the property of your neighbors and the property downstream from you as a result of the changes that are being made, and for that matter, upstream of you, as a result of the changes that are being made here. Those changes do not happen overnight. They don't happen over a year necessarily. They can take decades to develop. And so I'm concerned that if we approve a project that clears some of the vegetation away and exposes the land, that we have conditions that require the applicants to accept responsibility for remedying the adverse impacts that are at least partially caused by the clearance of that land. I mean, we're entering an era of climate change. It's a thing. And we're going to have atmospheric rivers that are really changing what a storm looks like, what it means. And I'm not here to tell you this is or isn't sufficient. I'm saying if we see gullying or rilling or tunneling and a loss of, subsidence of your property or the property near you, and the analysis can conclude that this is related, the project proponents need to accept responsibility for managing that and resolving that problem. It's impossible not to think about fire risk so close to a riparian corridor, and I realize that since I don't worship at that church, it's very nice, you must care about that a great deal more than I do, and I care about it a lot. So I am concerned that anything that we can do to mitigate the impact of hot burning vegetation be exploited, and I respect from the picture of where the boundaries are that there's a fair distance back from the parcel, some of which is downslope, where the ivy has grown up and suffocated the plants that are in the understory and are in the process of killing the plants that are the trees. And I think that as much as the dry dead tree that I saw and some of the other dead material, that Cape ivy is a great target for reducing fire risk to remove. You will be doing yourself a great favor. We would be doing the riparian corridor a great favor, because it doesn't support the kind of healthy, varied biota that these endangered species and threatened species need. So I would like to include on this project, but if I didn't say it, I support the project. I think that the speakers who are concerned about the project have raised some questions that ought to be considered, and if they feel strongly enough, they have every right to appeal, and I respect that right. But I do think that we need conditions that require consultation with the Army Corps in the event that any vegetation is removed from below the top of bank, as well as the existing condition that requires CDFW to be consulted for a 1600. The consultations with the Coastal Commission have convinced me that they don't need to weigh in on this project, that it's our project, and I'm happy to hear that. Thank you for running that to ground. And that we have a condition that monitors for erosion, and we pick it up and resolve it before it becomes a problem, which is something that historically the city does not do well. Let's see, and the removal of Cape ivy on the parcel, if I didn't make that clear. One of the speakers discussed noise, and I don't have a take. I assume that this is in a planned development district, yes? And I'm guessing that the noise ordinance that the noise standards don't exist. Do we have substantial, meaningful noise ordinance in this area?
we do. For commercially zoned properties, there is a specific standard where you measure the noise at the property line, and it is actually more detailed than the noise standards that you find in the noise ordinance and the general plan.
That's good.
So yeah, there are.
Okay. I'm not suggesting that we impose conditions that are in excess of what's in the general plan, but I want to be sure that the applicant is conscious of their responsibilities to manage noise with respect to their neighbors. Let's see. And if we are really depending on the elevator for getting people in and out in the event of emergency, that power supply, that emergency power supply, needs to be reliable enough to do that. It's a man-rated engineering system, and I want to be sure that we're up to snuff on that. And if it turns out that we don't, and the plan is to hand carry people out, that's great too. I just want clarity, because it sounded like it was really important. And if it's important to them, it's important to us. I'm comfortable with your take on the parking. I'm not losing sleep over that. That's it for me. Thanks.
Very good. I think, so first of all, I support this project. I think the issues, when we look at a church, it's a civic building, or it serves a purpose for the community. I think the architectural comments are really directed at, you've taken an office space and you've repurposed it for something that it wasn't originally intended for. The church I grew up in was a big cube painted in the colors of a serape blanket, so we all have limited budgets, and we do the best with what we've got. Maybe for the next iteration, you can consider something that
Serape blanket would be nice.
Maybe not on this project. But you know, I think that's the concern that's raised, is just, it was more architectural, like what is the purpose of this building, what's the use of the building. It's not conveyed necessarily by the architecture, but I'm fine with where we're at. This is, you know, you're making the best, I think, of what you've got. I think I am very concerned about the fire risk. The Cape Ivy is something I think that you know, the applicant should be encouraged or required to remove the Cape Ivy. And the debris that poses a fire hazard. I think that should be very clear. You know, going below the bank, I think maybe city staff could comment on their thoughts. I mean, I don't know, I know, Jimmy, you've expressed your view on this, but I think if we go below the bank, I think there's already an obligation to get approval, but maybe city staff can respond to that. And I actually like the idea of somehow monitoring for erosion, because that is a concern that's been raised by the neighbor, and we've had some major erosion issues here around Seymour Ditch. It's not huge, it's fairly mundane, and could save you guys save all of us quite a bit of cost in the future. Yeah, I don't have any other issues. Jill, I don't know if you have, if you want to respond. Actually, before we do that, I don't know what your views are on the mitigation, if you have a strong opinion one way or another on the mitigation issues, or... Okay.
The only, you're talking about adding the one issue and... Right, no. Well, if it's, as long as it's gone through staff and legal, yeah.
First, I would respond on the question of additional conditions. I put in front of you some revised language for condition A6. This deals with, it's kind of our regular landscape maintenance vegetation plan. I've appended some language to the end of that, which you may want to review and see if this addresses your concerns. This says basically the applicant shall submit evidence to the city prior to September 1 annually, documenting revegetation success in the area adjacent to the top of the slope leading to Pilarcitos Creek. Vegetation coverage shall be maintained in a manner that soils are stabilized and erosion of the slope is prevented. After 2 years, the Community Development Director may reduce the frequency of recording requirements based on evidence of successful revegetation. So that would address one of the questions that Commissioner Benjamin raised. I think it's simple enough to add a condition that would say, at this point, I would preface that there's no plan to remove vegetation going down the slope. If for some reason in the future the fire district said you have to do that, I don't think there's a problem with adding a condition that would say that once they go across the top of bank, that they would have to consult with the Army Corps of Engineers to see if a Section 404 permit is required. That would be a pretty straightforward condition to add.
Okay,
We
so
have, I'm sorry, we didn't quite communicate the whole bit. Part of this parcel moves over the top of bank, and so if there's a condition that requires removal of all of the Cape Ivy on the parcel, you may be kind of backing into requiring a Corps permit, and so we just want to make sure that's your intention.
Thank you. So from my perspective, I'm not asking them to go down into the, to go off the top of bank and into that area. I think they can do a lot to improve to mitigate the fire risk simply by dealing with the area that's above top of bank. So I'm okay with that. If the fire department asks for more, then, you know, it's a different project then. It takes on a different tone. I did have a comment about the building materials. I didn't know if there was anything about that exterior stair is kind of exposed to the to fire more than the rest of the building. It's kind of pushed out, and I wonder if there's some kind of flame-resistant material that might be used as an alternative to wood in that area.
Can I address the stair?
please, we'll open it up.
So our plan is to demolish the existing stair and replace it with actually a stair that's up to code. And at that time, we would enclose that stair using, yes, the story poles show it, but using the same materials as we have around the rest of the building that are matching our neighbors' materials, wood siding and windows. But the stair gets enclosed.
This is not a mandate to, you know, if there was something we could do to make it an effective escape route longer before flames consumed it, that would be a good thing. And I'm thinking wood isn't as good as some other materials, but I'm way out of my pay grade to even think that.
It's a wood frame building that meets fire code.
But this is closer to the veg than the rest of that wood building.
Right, but the materials are the same. The building is a wood frame building that is sprinklered and
sprinkler. Thank you.
Well, the stairwell would be interior of the stairwell would be sprinklered. Yes.
Great. I think
Thank
that would
you.
address the concern.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so far I've heard support for the project. Did you have any other comments on the environmental side, vegetation? Okay. So right now I've got we've got the revised condition number 6, which I think addresses the concerns and allows the applicant to deal with the Cape Ivy. I think Jimmy's point we'd like to add, and Doug, your suggestion of adding an approved language around a Section 404 permit, we would sort of, I recommend that we put that in. I don't have.
Just a question of clarity, that second sentence in the revised condition, and I'm just going to read into the record, vegetation coverage shall be maintained in a manner that soils are stabilized and erosion of the slope is prevented. That is not just for the 2 years, that's in perpetuity, yes? Okay, so we'll add in perpetuity if that's okay with you. Because it's attached to the 2-year. I want there to be no question about that. And I don't think that's the intent, there's no, yeah.
And please remove the Oxford comma before stabilized, so there's clarity. Thank you. Okay, any other? Okay, can I get a motion, please?
I guess that's me. So, help me out if I miss anything. I move that we approve the resolution next in order with the addition that the condition A6 as presented this evening is amended to include the following language. The applicant shall submit evidence to the city prior to September 1 annually, documenting revegetation success in the area adjacent to the top of slope leading to Pilarcitos Creek. Vegetation coverage shall be maintained in perpetuity in a manner that soils are stabilized and erosion of the slope is prevented. After 2 years, the Community Development Director may reduce the frequency of reporting requirements based on the evidence of successful vegetation. In addition, a condition is added that should vegetation be removed or added below top of bank, that the Army Corps of Engineers shall be consulted to determine whether there is a requirement for a 401 or a 404 permit, in addition to the 1600 permit question that's already in the CDFW. That the applicant shall remove Cape Ivy. Oh, I'm sorry.
It doesn't call it Cape Ivy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A6 allows them, they'll manage Cape Ivy.
Bear with me a moment. That A6 includes the removal of Cape Ivy, so we can say that, and at worst it's redundant. And that the exterior stairwell shall be sprinklered. Did I miss anything?
Can I get a
That is
second?
the motion, which is mine.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Evans,
Yes.
Commissioner DeMond,
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin,
Yes.
and Chair Holt, or I'm sorry, Chair Hernandez.
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion passes 4-0. You got the elevator in.
Did I get the elevator?
You did.
Okay.
No, no, you didn't get the elevator. They already covered the.
The power supply for.
I don't think that thing gets whatever code.
It's whatever code.
I mean, it's the fire department.
They already spoke to it.
They own it.
They're already
Okay.
addressing it.
Okay. And besides, hopefully there's enough.
I hope so. Up there, but I follow you.
So item 3 has been continued to a later date.
That's right.
Is there a, when does the comment period close on the MND?
I'm sorry, I didn't bring that one with me. That,
Has it closed yet?
no, it has not closed yet. And that item will be renoticed because it's being continued to a date uncertain. We're requiring some plan revisions. I found some discrepancies in the plans.
But the comment period closes on like the 25th.
It closes pretty close to when the hearing was going to be,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
And it remains posted on the website.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on to, I guess that's it. Do you have any community development director
Just a
updates?
couple quick ones. So we are working on a transition, moving the planning commission meetings to the library. We got a lot of positive feedback about your last meeting in that space from our attendees who found it much more comfortable. So Your next meeting, November 27th, will be the study session on the Natural Resources chapter of the LUP. We will be in the library. Now, just to keep it confusing, we'll be back in here on December 11th, where you will have 2 city projects to consider, the Highway 1 North signalization project at Terrace and the Parks Master Plan. Both of them will be before you with initial studies and mitigated negative declarations. Joe, I think you provided a copy of each of those documents. So you have hard copies of those 2 environmental studies before you, so you can take those home now in advance. December 19th, you'll have a special meeting. It's a Wednesday, and that will be in the library. It will be on the other land use plan chapters that you received at your last session. Access and rec, hazards, cultural resources, scenic and visual resources, and we will convey the development chapter that evening and give an overview of it. Just so everyone knows what's going on in January. January 8th, we expect to have several business items, and January 22nd, we've held open for a land use plan study session. Had 2 hearings last week. Approved a new house and ADU on Metzger. I continued an item on Toulouse in Frenchman's Creek. And this Wednesday, I will see an ADU on Myrtle. And City Council, just so you know what's up with them, on the 20th, their next meeting in a week, they're going to consider some policy points for tenant protection measures. They're really not Planning Commission specific purview, but we wanted you to know about that. And then December 4th, they'll be considering their annual Measure D allocation, and we'll update you on that. And that's all I have.
Very good. I think I've already sent my email notification in. On the 27th, I will not be here. I have provided the location where I plan to dial in. On the 7th, I will be attending a sales conference in Dallas. So I will be January 8th that week. I will be unavailable. So just want to make sure we have quorum for both of those. If there's any question. Any other?
So the study session, no action. These are all study sessions with respect to the LCP, yes? Okay. And if the development chapter is coming next, and then sometime in the future the Public Works, that's not set to drop.
We're running numbers for it, and if we have numbers ready, you'll see some of those. We won't have the whole chapter in December, but we would like to give you some little bit of math around some of this.
I know you're working hard. I don't want these questions to sound hostile.
Thank you.
So it's not about that at all.
Understood. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Any Planning Commission comments? Okay. Just want to thank you all for putting together the special study session we did at the library. I know a lot of work went into it, and I've received a lot of positive public comments. Received some very pointed questions about things that people are interested in, but I think it's a good. I know a lot of work went into it, and I really appreciate what city staff did to pull that together. So thank you. Can I get a motion?
Moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.